Neopaganism and modern witchcraft are an expression of individualism and reflect individualization happening in the realm of religion. Now, let's back that up with a bit of evidence and explanation, shall we? So to start off with, we're going to take a little trip through individualization as a sociological theory. It's a theory that was started by a couple German people, Ulrich Beck and Elisabeth Beck-Gernsheim. Cool people. And it really deals with this idea of the societal sources of truth, societal sources of guidance, basically ceding ground to individual choice, or rather, a rhetorical trick of sorts where responsibility is passed from these institutions onto individual people, which isn't to say that these societal institutions cease to be relevant. It's just rather than being in full control, or at least giving the impression of full control, they're being replaced with individual choice, right? And this coincides with individualism and capitalism. Big words. So Beck and Beck-Gernsheim, they posit that life narratives used to be straightforward. If your father was a carpenter, you would probably be a carpenter too, and your sons, if you have any, would also be carpenters. And if you were a woman, well, tough shit. And they're not anymore. Life narratives are very much, as Beck and Beck-Gernsheim put them, a DIY biography. So it really takes on this idea of pushing the idea of social forces having an effect on people's lives to an idea of a risk society where your own choices are the reason that bad things happen, right? If you if you don't get the job because you're a woman, actually it was your own choice in some abstract way, right? Now, this isn't to say that, like, this is the only way of analyzing society, and it isn't the unequivocal best one. I just think that this is a very good fit and can really explain some things that I've noticed in my journey through researching what the heck a neo-paganism is. I'm not the authority, however, obviously. I've just, spent a few days researching it. And do your own research from reputable sources, academic sources, and I guess also ask some practitioners as well, because they'll have some insight too, obviously. And one more thing that I want to add is this whole hedging section is that I'm using religion as a kind of catch-all for spiritual beliefs that are in some way organized. So that would capture stuff like Wicca, but it would also capture stuff like Judaism or Buddhism or Christianity or Shintoism. So that's the definition of religion that I'm working with here. Now that I've explained what individualization as a theory is and done a wee bit of hedging, let's dive into the history of modern, well, I guess Neo takes care of that. Neo-paganism. Okay? So we take ourselves back to the 1500s and a bit earlier, right? And here's where we have the origin of witches and witchcraft. There's this interesting interplay between Christianity, witchcraft, and, epistemologies, right? Where I guess like physicians at the time and surgeons at the time, they, they knew things outside of witchcraft. They had like a proto-scientific method of, oh, this is seen to work, so we'll keep doing that. So some names, if you want to search them up, would be Paracelsus or Paracelsus. Not sure how to pronounce it. I've only seen it like written, and John of Ardenne. So these dudes in particular, they predate the, I guess, conception of witches as Satan worshippers, right? That really arose in like the 1600s with witch hunts and Salem witch trial, etc. And there's kind of like this big overlap between like magic and Christianity, and these people are kind of like people like John of Arden and stuff, right? Their contemporaries like also did stuff like alchemy, which isn't the scientific method at all that we would recognize, right? But I take us back that far because I want to illustrate something that, particularly with witchcraft and the modern witchcraft, they're very much divorced from this history, right? These witches that existed in the like 14 to 16, 1700s, like these like kind of fell out of fashion by the 1700s when you really get to like the Enlightenment period. And so it kind of makes sense that people would see science being like, wow, we are doing an industry, and be like, maybe our old methods are not 100% airtight. But anyway, this isn't neo-paganism or the occult revival just yet, is it? For that, we have to jump another 100 or so years into the future, more like 200-ish, to the late 19th and earliest 20th century, right? We really start with middle class bourgeoisie, if you want to call them that, people being, well, bored, right? And so you get the occult revival kind of happening there. And so it wasn't really based in any particular ancient tradition per se. It was kind of an exoticization of beliefs that were believed to come, in history. And that's where you get stuff like Ouija boards and stuff. Ouija boards? I don't know. Another thing that I've only seen written. But go a bit further forward to the like 30s and 40s, the 1930s and 40s, that is. And we end up with people like Nazis, unfortunately. And they were really they were looking for both, in a way, like a wonder weapon, a way to win, but also like this mysticism was based around the idea that there was this ancient Aryan religion that Christianity wiped out because of the Jews or something. And they really wanted to reject, Christianity that had, Jewish roots. And they went with Germanic Aryan religion that, well, something idealized past. Can you tell they're fascists? But around this time we kind of have a bit of like the origins of Wicca, right? With a dude named Gerald Gardner. And he was around at the same time as well. Didn't really pick up steam until really like the 60s, but still. This religion I've seen some people describe as cafeteria paganism, such as like, pick what you like, discard what you don't. It's all about whatever's comfortable to you and your belief. Which sounds a little tiny bit like individualization happening. But anyway. Another historical, let's say, fallacy, a bit of historical malpractice that coincides with the same period of neo-pagan revivalism is this thing called the witch cult hypothesis. And it posits like a clandestine survival of paganism. And in my notes here it says, this is flawed as fuck, by the way. Which, yes, it's flawed as fuck. It's like, you can't just take historical quotes and fit them to your narrative. You have to understand the context that they're in. And the lady that came up with the witch cult hypothesis kinda didn't do that. She just kinda cherry-picked and was like, oh, witches, they have been here all the time. And it's like, maybe not, hey. Now, if we go a little bit further forward, though, because I mentioned before that it really waited until the 60s to take off. Well, what was in the 60s, you may ask? Hippies. And feminism, but, hippies and feminism are somewhat related, kinda-ish. And it kind of came as a rebellion of sorts against Christianity, particularly like the hegemony of Christianity and the patriarchal attitudes that arose from it. And that's probably why, to this day, paganism, neo-paganism, is particularly popular among feminists and women. Not, which isn't to say that everyone that practices this stuff is, you know, feminine, because that's not true. But there is some element of rebellion against Christianity. The last thing that I will touch on the the history of paganism is that a lot of the early work in neo-pagan revivalism was very much self-help adjacent, right? They posited ways to, I guess, help yourself and give yourself a little bit of power with stuff like the law of assumption and manifesting, which isn't inherently bad. It's just self-help adjacent. Which will lead us nicely into what the heck paganism is. Neo-paganism. So let's divide it up into two kind of sections, because I researched what practitioners actually say uh, under the kind of heading of a witch blur or witches on Tumblr, and what academic sources say about neo-paganism and the neo-pagan revival. So let's start off with the witch blur. The first main thing I mentioned before, manifesting or the law of assumption, it's this idea that you can actually find in, well, Romanian Orthodox mysticism of willing things into existence if you think on it and like focus your energy on it. And from one particular person, they mentioned that you need to be specifically working towards the thing that you want to happen in order for manifesting to work, which to me kind of screams self-help. But anyway, that's the law of assumption. The other interesting thing that I noticed is another echo of self-help in the idea of like personal shrines or sacred spaces that act as a spiritual center for yourself. And keeping your shrine tidy will keep your mental health good as well. So you can see why it's self-help. um one more interesting point I've noticed in practice is burning herbs. Again, this is mainly in the like witchcraft type uh category, since this is from Witchblur. But essentially they're like in this weird position where some people in their practice are appropriating white sage burning from Native Americans. Can you tell that they're in the US? And also replacing hard to find herbs because, well, a lot of this stuff is based on, European stuff, and you can't find a lot of these herbs in the US. Did I mention they're probably in the US? Anyway, they replace them with like other alternatives, which I guess is probably for the best because you don't want to, messing with hemlock. Replace with tobacco, sure. That's safer, probably. I mean, you might get a nicotine addiction. But anyway, another thing that I noticed is there's a big overlap with astrology, right? Reading the stars for guidance, tarot, blah blah blah. And I found this master post of all the different types of divination, right? And I thought that was very interesting because there was one based on tea leaves. Now, I'm not going to go out and research it because I kind of don't want to learn more about Harry Potter in particular, since I'm a trans. But I feel like this could have some overlap with doing it as an aesthetic. Like, you liked Harry Potter as a kid, and now you're like a teenager and rebelling against the Christianity you were raised in, so you do the tea leaf thing from Harry Potter to feel cool. It's not bad. It is a thing. But again, it's not bad. Just wish that people would read another book, that's all. Of course, that's all moot if the tea leaf reading stuff is something that Jowling, Cowling, Rowling, picked up and appropriated for a book. But anyway, another interesting point that supported by, the people that I read content from on Tumblr was that cafeteria paganism idea, right? Where a lot of these people that aren't, necessarily following um, a particular religion might worship like a hodgepodge of stuff from Ars Daemonum Arcanum or whatever it's called, that was written by some Christian dudes, plus like Norse, Greek, Roman, and Egyptian gods, and just picking and choosing the ones that vibe the most with you, which really leans into that cafeteria paganism. And I guess for being more academic about it, there's a sense of syncretism here because a lot of these neo-pagans that lean more into the witchy or Wicca side of things take stuff like Thoin, that's how it's meant to be pronounced apparently, good to know, which is an ostensibly like Gaelic tradition, right? And they add in other beliefs, like for example deities from a pantheon that's not even in Europe, which is interesting. Like it's really that syncretic like cafeteria paganism. And finally, the last thing that I encountered on Tumblr when looking up at what people believe in is that actually some people just don't believe in it. They might be atheist, they might be Christian, they might be Jewish, etc. But they just like the witchy aesthetic, which, fair enough, it's a cool aesthetic. And yeah, it's a good vibe. You do you. Whatever feels right is what your practice should be. I saw someone specifically straight up say that exact quote verbatim. Let's put a pin in that one for later. Might have something to do with individualization. I'm on the other side now because we're going into the academic side. We're no longer looking particularly at Witchblur. So this isn't to say that the academic sourcing is the be all end all and overrides everything that I gleaned from reading people's actual experiences with this stuff. However, it does provide a nice framework to understand it all. Since, I'm not the first person to research this, and academia, it's a reasonable source for this stuff. Anyway, one common thread that has been identified in academia that is common to a lot of neo-pagan beliefs is this idea of unverified personal gnosis. So what that means, often abbreviated to UPG, unleaded petroleum gas. No. It's this idea of having personal spiritual experiences and forming the basis of one's beliefs and ethics and religion overall on top of that. Christianity kinda has this as well. In this idea of like everyone has a personal relationship with God because when he created all of us, he put a little piece of himself in all of us, and you pray to God. You don't always pray like collectively, and I think that's interesting that it kind of has a little bit of commonality with Christianity. I mean, more than a little bit, but we'll get to that. So within academia, there's like an organization of these beliefs into kind of like a spectrum, right? Where things will fall in between these two ends of the spectrum, right? First end is polytheistic reconstructionism, right? It's really trying to reconstruct an idealized past set of beliefs. Particularly Germanic paganism, as I mentioned before with the Nazis, is really romanticizing pre-Christian Europe without necessarily having evidence of the particular beliefs existing in the same way that modern pagans do it. Which, again, not a bad thing. Religions change over time, right? Like, if I was, saying our father in Romanian, it might not be the same way that it was said like 1,000 years ago. And that's okay. Religions can and do change over time. But it's just important to note that, like, polytheistic reconstructionism aims for accuracy in some regards, whereas it doesn't necessarily have anything to base its accuracy on, which, again, not necessarily bad, not inherently bad at all. I'm not saying that. Anyway, the other end of the spectrum is eclectic paganism. So, as I've previously referred to it, I guess, cafeteria paganism, right? Taking in beliefs from everywhere. Hi. Remember I mentioned earlier that some of this stuff is like coming from a rebellion against Christianity? Well, the more eclectic paganist side of the spectrum kind of takes stuff from Christianity, right? Like, it reimagines celebrations in some regards, right, as being ancient pagan traditions, which they're not, to be fair. They're not. But I think that's really interesting. Like, heck, that odd Os Demon Arcanum book, right? That wasn't even written by like pagans. That was written by like some Christian dudes in the 1500s. Anyway, back to the main show. So I will leave off the academia side from a quote that I got from the AskHistorians subreddit, which is pretty reputable, I would say. They actually include sources, which is nice. Wicca is a postmodern return to an idealized past that never really existed. And I don't think necessarily that it's just Wicca that does this. Alright, so let's tie this all back in together. What is religion? I think you could say that it's intrinsically tied to culture and community. In some regards, there's like ethno-religions like Judaism, right? But outside of that, we have stuff like Christianity, where you have, group prayer with stuff like, praying in church, singing with the choir, or, saying grace before meals in the Protestant tradition. Then you have stuff like Hinduism, where you have big festivals where everyone takes part. And even among like Aboriginal Australians, you have sharing oral history in the community and yarning circles to really build that sense of community, right? So in the West in particular, however, it's really tied into societal institutions, particularly of the church, the big spooky church. And, this isn't to say that these religions that I've mentioned, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, that they're devoid of individualized aspects, right? As I mentioned before, Christianity in particular has a feature of your personal relationship with God. But in my research, which isn't to say that every neo-pagan is like this, but what I've noticed is that a lot of neo-paganism kind of flips that on its head and tends to emphasize the individual gnosis above community gnoses. Can you see the individualization here? If your religion is based around picking and choosing what feels right, is that not inherently falling in line with what individualization says? And it's in the sense that it's a rebellion against Christianity, a very organized and hierarchical religion as it exists. It doesn't have to be, but it is. Neopaganism comes off as a deconstruction of those institutions that bind us to a particular belief with a more individualized system of religiosity. It's about choosing what you'll believe, choosing what to believe in, choosing whether you'll have a belief. We're going the more atheist route. And it's very much in opposition to, a socially learned, socially adhered to system in the way that religions like, again, Christianity, Hinduism, Shintoism, etc., right? Like, those socially learned belief systems prevalent in modernity, but they may be perhaps fading a bit away in late modernity, as individualization predicts. So tradition it can't really exist in the same way that it does with these other religions, because tradition is partly a communal experience, right? It's partly like going to church on Easter with the whole family and then coming home and having the pig together and having sarmale and having a big like celebration. And it's really taking part in something bigger than yourself, which is a contrast to late modernity, right? Late modernity says, hey, actually, maybe put yourself into smaller and smaller boxes so we can market to you directly and make you buy things. Now, is neopaganism bad? Am I saying that it's bad? No. No, of course not, you dolts. I'm not saying it is bad at all. I'm just putting forward a theory of how I see it as interpreted through the lens of individualization, because I think it really fits pretty well. And as I mentioned before, right, you could probably guess that part of my belief system would be Romanian Orthodox, right? Wow, I'm Romanian. You wouldn't expect that from my English accent, but it's like this religion is a key part of, I guess, being Romanian for me and many other people. And like I'm in a sense making a choice to keep in touch with my Romanianness, because I obviously don't live in Romania. I'm speaking English pretty fucking well, hey. And if I'm gonna be a bit Romanian, îmi păstrez limba și identitatea. I'm gonna have to put subtitles in this, fuck. But anyway, a fi român, o română, e să fii ortodox, da. Și așa păstrăm sensul de a fi români. Pentru că fără credință, fără ortodoxia, de fapt, ce e să fii român? Back to English now, because English. And I think like in a place where there isn't that strong sense of tying, oh well, there isn't that sense of a collective identity in the same way, like the US, right? Like being American does have a strong tie to a particular brand of Christianity. However, might not want to take part in that national identity because, well, it's not that great. This is one thing that I will say that is bad. Very like American jingoist Protestant identity is not the greatest. But anyway, you might make the choice of taking on neo-pagan beliefs to, you know, be an individual. And yeah. Individualization, hey. So to wrap this up, I know we all love the word valid, and, you know, my brand of agnostic, kinda Romanian Orthodox Christianity is, you know, is just as valid as any neo-pagan beliefs, which is to say, completely valid, and that's okay. I just think that everyone has a responsibility to understand where their belief system comes from and understand why they believe the things they believe without, you know, adhering to it unquestioningly. Everyone should question themselves. That's healthy. That's how you grow and be a better person. And everyone should do that. Christian, neo-pagan, etc. aside.